afternoon, Keller Williams Realty. What's happening? Have a good day? Have a
It's
productive day?
freaking cold outside. What the heck? It's
It's only
very cold.
April. It's only April.
Stop it, Debbie, or
Give it
put
some
a
time.
coat on. Quit your complaining.
Oh boy, it looks like I'm gonna have to cut off everybody's microphones because it's getting nasty. All righty. So, a couple of things for us this afternoon. Some quick announcements and an unveiling. That's exciting, right? Unveilings are always fun. So a quick announcement on federal unemployment. I do hear from CTR that will go live tomorrow. CTDOL has confirmed that will go live tomorrow. So if you have not filed for unemployment with the CTDOL yet, and you were waiting for the independent contractor version of this, and you intend to do that tomorrow, I am looking for one volunteer, and it's first come, first serve to my phone. So just text me to do that together, so that I can work through that with you, so I understand how it's done, so that I can then at 4:30 tomorrow run through an application with everybody. Make sense? Boy, oh boy, you guys have some fast fingers. So I will be happy to do all three of you who just popped up. So thank you. I have my volunteers. I have my 4 volunteers. I will be happy to do those 4. So and that's going to be Alice, April, Diane, and Mary. So give me some time let's wait till that portal opens tomorrow, and I'll connect with you. I'll do at least one of you before 4:30. I may have to do the others of you after 4:30, depending on how the afternoon goes. As a matter of fact, I'm almost certain I'll have to do most of you after 4:30. And it looks like Mary was first to my phone. So Mary, you and I will find time between 3 and 4:30 tomorrow to run that through. And then the other 3 will work after 5. All right, so that's the first announcement. The second announcement is I pointed you all to a Mike Brody one-on-one this afternoon with a link that then got changed. That the only way you knew that was a changed link is if you actually had information that was released a week ago. So my apologies. I didn't know it wasn't functioning for you until after it was already over. I know it was recorded, so I am working on getting the recording. I will say I was sort of underwhelmed with the information that was on it. So for those of you, I know I built it up this morning. For those of you who ended up missing it because of a bad link, you really didn't miss all that much. I think we have, no offense to Mike, but I think that we have more dynamic wealth building and expense conversations here in this room over the last couple of weeks than what we were offered earlier today. So, and I think that was just a function of the venue and how Mike was prepped. The information that he did share, though, that was interesting was he is a part of a group that speaks directly to Lawrence Yun, who is the chief economist for NAR, and they were just on a phone call with Mr. Yun the other day, yesterday, I think, with his predictions for how the rest of the year is going to go, how next year is going to go. Mike kind of packaged that and gave that to us. He also sent it to Gary last night. He indicated to us that Gary's response was, thanks for the info, sounds optimistic, which it sounds like a specific and very relevant Gary response. And what Lawrence Yun said was that the expectation is that we're going to have an inverted Q1, Q4 with Q2, Q3 this year, meaning that the second and third quarters of the year, which is right now through the end of September, will be much lighter than they typically are, and yet we'll see a fourth quarter and perhaps a first quarter of 2021 that's a little more robust than typical. With units, he's predicting still being up year over year, units and volume, not by a lot, but up some, and pricing remaining somewhat flat to a point or two up. If it's a point or two up across the country, that means flat to a point or two down here typically. So interesting news. And then his 2021 prediction was that units would be up yet again, and yet with everything else kind of remaining the same. So, who knows? And yet it was some interesting prognostication from Lawrence Young looking ahead to next year. Whoever is Galaxy S8, you keep unmuting. So if you could stay muted, that would be so awesome. Thank you so much. And again, for those of you who weren't able to get in and who wanted that information, I encourage you to just hang out for NAR. NAR is actually putting Lawrence Young's information together to send out to all of us. So do watch for that from him instead of maybe diving in and going back on that Mike Brody thing from earlier. All righty. What else do we have? Yeah. So what time is it? Do we have time for a quick break? Yeah, we have time for a quick break, because you got to have a quick break every once in a while. Let's have a slightly quick break, and then we'll cover our one last thing.
In my dream world, I'm still your dream girl. Ooh, I'm still your dream girl.
Okay, that's an ad. That's not what I was.
All right, this comes from, these are real, by the way. These are real police reports from different local newspapers. Angela Bass sent this from Sandusky, Ohio. 5:33 p.m., police responded to a burglar alarm on the 3100 block of Milan Road. They found a woman had fallen into a door while doing a complicated exercise move. Police reported seeing spandex twisted around her body in a way they will never unsee. Tammy Cleveland in Stoughton, Wisconsin, 11:43 p.m., a 41-year-old woman flagged down police to report her daughter is missing. The daughter was found sleeping in a room, but the mother did not see her because the room was so messy. Turns out it wasn't a kidnapping, it was a kid napping. Julie Heffel in Ramsey, Minnesota, 4:58 p.m. A caller on West Point Avenue reported that a belligerent squirrel was preventing him from using his boat dock. The caller said he knew nothing could be done about it, but wanted the officer to know what kind of squirrels are running about in the community. He called back later to complain that an owl was making too much noise after 10 p.m. Damn nature. Wendell Alderson in Sacramento, California, 4:43 p.m. A caller said a man was acting tweaky and attempting to sell him a bottle of goop. Luckily, he didn't buy it. You know how easy it is to get addicted to goop. Oh, man, I need some goop. Carrie Cahill in Marblehead, Massachusetts, 12:01 a.m. A woman called police to report that she could hear someone in her house, and she heard them open the refrigerator door. While on the line with police, the woman found out it was her husband. A few minutes later, neighbors called the police to report a woman yelling at her husband for scaring the crap out of her. Thanks for sending those real police reports from different local newspapers.
All righty, thank you so much, Ellen. We appreciate you as always. I wanted to show you our listing documents. Oftentimes, our listing documents, we're having one issue with listing documents that are coming in kind of the same, and I think we've recognized, we've identified the issue, and the issue is there's not a separate field for the town on your listing property address on our listing contracts. So we are having that fixed, even though it says, let me bring one up for you. I can't tell you how many of these I get a day, so I thought we would just discuss it real quick and let you know that we are fixing it, and also let you know what we need to do to address it. See right here where it says street address on your listing contracts? There's no place for town anywhere, right? The MLS assumes that you're going to put the town here on this line with the street address. And yet what many of us are doing is putting in Algonquin Road and then diving right into the zip code, which leaves the town missing, right? And so I've been kicking a whole bunch of these back in the last couple of weeks, wondering why on earth is everyone missing the town? And it's simply because there's no separate field for it. So do know you have to have a town in there, and you can just do it at the end of 28 Algonquin Road, comma, your Bethel, whatever that town is, in that one field, as we're fixing to have a separate field for town inserted in that. That's not something that we can do on our own with our documents, so it has been requested to be fixed. Do know that in the meantime, please be cautious that you're not leaving the town out in this area right here, and just stick it after whatever the street address actually is. Make sense? All righty. And then the most important conversation of the evening is the reveal of our new forms. And so you spoke and we listened, and what we did was we revised the disclosure document for you. And so instead of having a disclosure and consent form plus a health form, we combined it all into one that is just a single page physical showing consent form. All of the same protections and information that were on the consent and disclosure form are handled here in these bullet points, and then down here again in these bullet points. So that's all the old disclosure and consent form. And then stuck right here in the middle, as you can see, is now just an attestation that they're going to sign to for health, right? So instead of having a separate form for all that, it's just all part of this. The other thing that we've addressed is that the health forms were only asking the visitors to a home to disclose anything about their health. And as we know, we've had some issues where the owners of properties, the sellers themselves or the occupants of the house, have been the ones who have been ill. So this now is an attestation by everybody involved that they're not sick. So anybody who signs this form is saying, I'm not sick. So that covers both our sellers for people entering their home. It also covers our buyers for people, for them going into someone's home, and their agents, as well as any third-party vendors. If you'll note, this form now is for all parties: buyers, sellers, current tenants, potential tenants, landlords, and any third-party vendors or entities, which includes the buyers or tenants' agents and or the buyers and tenants' brokerages. So it's just one all-encompassing form, and the way you use this sucker is the same way you use the other one. At the bottom, you'll see the signature tabs, and that is the seller and or the landlord will sign to give authorization for physical showings. You as the listing agent will sign on behalf of you and the brokerage to further authorize physical showings. If it were me, I would then put that up on the MLS and have that signed document by the landlords or sellers and the listing agent available for download for the buyer's agent and the buyers to sign prior to a showing. It is not property specific any longer. It's specific to whatever property is either owned by the seller or the landlord and or being shown to the buyer. So you can also use this with your buyers if you want to get their signatures if you're showing things that are not our listings. I was also asked to have some kind of a document that would allow it to be used on things that weren't our listings. And so this form is kind of an all-in-one. The question that I'm certain all of you are asking yourselves and dying to know the answer to is, if I have the other forms signed, do I need to replace them with this form? You certainly don't have to. I think you'll find that this form is far more user-friendly and far more in line with what some of our competitors have gone to as well, which is just a simple showing consent form. And so I think you'll have less conversation and less irritation if you move to this form. Again, with your seller clients, you can just simply say that we've looked to streamline this process. It has all the information that the other ones had, but in a single page form that covers everybody. So I would certainly have that taken care of and replace the other ones out so that you don't have to have issue or argument any longer. Any questions? Should occupants that are not the seller or the landlord sign as well? So yes, that includes current tenants and potential tenants. So current tenants would answer that, and then any third-party vendor or entity. Yes. And if the sellers sign this and then 2 weeks later they're exposed to the virus, yeah. So it's a really good question, Jeannie, and the answer is maybe what you want to do, at least for the short term, is have this up. I mean, you have to draw a line someplace, right? And so you're not going to have this updated by the sellers every single day. You know, it's the same argument, and this is not a political statement, it's just a simple fact. It's the same argument that's being made about our vice president not wearing a mask when he visited the Mayo Clinic yesterday, right? And his explanation for that was, well, I get tested a lot and I know I don't have it. Well, that could change in the course of an hour. It could change in the course of 24 hours. It could change in the course of a week. I'm not sure what the answer to that really is, right? Because at some point we have to draw a line that says, what I might do is have a conversation with my sellers that says, so you're going to disclose that you're not currently ill right now. And just like if something changes at your house, you have to change the disclosure form, right? If all of a sudden a tree falls on your back porch and damages your back porch, well, then you may have to change your disclosure form to say that there's now damage to the back porch. Just like this consent form, you may have to update that as you have something happen. Please note they're also dated, and so because they're dated, buyers can always take a look and say, well, this was dated 3 weeks ago. Can the sellers re-sign to tell me that they're not ill? I think it's unlikely that will occur, and yet they certainly could ask that because it is dated. So they're making a statement. The sellers are making a statement as of the date that this is signed. Does that answer that? Okay, good. And I think that Hai just described exactly what I was talking about. Yes, she did, right? So buyers can always ask for an update if they so choose. So I'm hopeful that this is exciting news for everybody, because I think that it's a simpler process, and I think that you'll get far less pushback while continuing to keep you and everyone around you safe, as we promised to do. Any questions, comments, concerns on this document?
Where will we find it?
Great question. So since it only came back to me about 15 minutes before we got on this call, it is the place it exists right now is in my hot little hands, and so it will be sent out to you in a PDF form before I finish work tonight. And we are having these forms populated now in DocuSign and in Command, so that they can be sent out and done electronically. So that is happening. You will have the PDF though before 8 o'clock tonight. And if you have any questions on it, just let me know. Awesome. Thank you for all of you who made suggestions about how to make that form better and how to simplify the process. All of that was very helpful to kind of rethink it a month later and say, yeah, you know what, a lot of this is extra and we don't need it, so let's pare it down and make it simpler.
Rick,
yes.
if husband and wife both are coming for the showing, so one form will be enough, or they have to sign 2 separate forms?
If the information is the same, then one form is plenty. If the information is not the same, then they may want to go and do 2 forms, but there's room for everybody to sign, right? There's room for a couple to sign, and if you have extra people, which you're not supposed to have, just PS, just have them sign below.
Okay.
Any other questions? Nope. Okay, any questions on anything else before we wrap up tonight? Anything else that you have been dealing with? Anything you want to report? Any issues? Any questions from the field? Nope.
Hey, Rick.
Yes,
Rick,
Jessica.
PPP,
Yes.
if you did that and that's happening, is this new unemployment totally different? It has nothing to do with it if you got that already or any of that?
Correct. That's a great question, Jessica. Thank you for asking it. So yeah, the PPP and the EIDL, those are all SBA loan and grant issues that kind of live over here. If you're filing for unemployment, that lives over here. The two do not intersect any place, and if you've asked for one, it does not preclude you from asking for the other.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you should be good with both. They don't intersect really anywhere. One won't know that you have the other. Which isn't to say that you're getting away with anything, by the way. That you are legally able to apply for and receive both if you so qualify.
So Rick,
Yes.
the form that you went through with us maybe week and a half ago, what was that?
You'll have to be a little more specific.
Maybe 2 weeks ago. I don't know. You went through this whole form with us, and I don't know what it was.
The unemployment.
Yeah, so if you can find it and send it to me, I'll be happy to comment on it.
They're saying it was the regular unemployment. So
not the independent contractor one. The first one you went through with us when it first came out.
Oh, sorry, we're talking about that. You said form, and I went back to form. So what I went through online was filing for unemployment through the regular state unemployment portal, which for independent contractors was not going to be working all that well. So, and the other question that I've received is, what do I do if I filed the regular state unemployment way and that I'm kind of all stuck in all that? Do I have to redo it tomorrow? I don't know the answer to that. We expect to have an answer from CTR and CTDOL by tomorrow when this portal opens, and we don't know what time it opens yet. I'll be checking, kind of doing my refresh, just to make sure that we don't miss the opening. It's not like if you miss the opening, they're going to run out of money. This is a separate thing than the PPP. The PPP is most likely going to run out of money. Unemployment is likely not to. So,
hey Rick,
yeah.
I got news that it said that for agents who have already applied on unemployment, we do not need to wait till we are declined in order to apply with this new system for unemployment.
Well, and so that is correct. What is unclear, however, still is whether or not you actually have to reapply, or if they're going to take your existing claim and just move it over into the
and transfer it. Yeah.
Right. So that's the part that's unclear. But it is true, you do not have to be officially stamped denied in order to be eligible for the federal benefits.
Yeah, because it seems like they've classified agents in the vacation / shutdown category.
Well, so no, they haven't pushed us there. The reason most people ended up in the temporary shutdown category was everybody, regardless of who you were, ended up there to defer applications so that they could start moving people in where they were supposed to be. That was just like the catch-all with all the bazillions of applications they got, and then they started moving people where they were supposed to go. So everybody got dumped into that pool.
Some did get approved, though, as you know.
Right, but approved and not funded. So approved, it doesn't mean anything if you got approved from state unemployment, because you are not eligible as independent contractors for state unemployment. So your approvals are not really relevant. So we have to now see whether or not the approval for the federal it will happen via another application via that portal, or a move over from your state thing.
So Rick,
Yeah.
with the regular unemployment that we went through with you, whenever it was, so we could still apply for what we're going to do tomorrow?
So they're two completely separate things. One is state unemployment, that again, as independent contractors, regardless of the CARES Act, regardless of what you've received and what you've heard, you are not eligible. You will not receive money from the state for state unemployment, right? And so some of you are just in a lag process, getting more and more information as they continue to process your claim, recognizing that there's no foundation for benefits, right? And some of you are already through there. And I know that Alice provided me with a sample, and I think one or two of others of you provided me with a sample of all the zeros that the document that you got that said there's no income to base this on, so therefore your benefit is zero, right? So you were approved, but you were approved for $0, right? Which is the same as you're ineligible for state unemployment. So the federal side is a different portal underneath the CARES Act, which lives outside of state unemployment, that independent contractors are eligible for, and we'll see how that process goes tomorrow as the portal opens and we take a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Questions, comments, concerns, queries? Isn't it fun when things just change daily? It's like you learn something and then you have to unlearn it to relearn something else the next day. All right, guys, so if that's...
Can I give a public thank you to Sam today for spending 45 minutes on the Zoom with me and helping me through DocuSign? It was a godsend.
Oh, excellent, 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 yes.
And I want to ditto that because I spent an hour.
Thank you also to Adonis. He did the same for me.
Oh, and Adonis saved me on sharing documents and going through the buyer broker and disclosures on Zoom. He was a hero to me.
Adonis helped me earlier in the week. This time it was Sam's turn.
See that?
I'm chiming in for Deb Linke then.
Well, there you go. Right. So do know that we have a massively talented staff that are working as hard as they possibly can under challenging circumstances, both in and out of their living rooms, to continue to serve you at the highest level. So thank you to them all again. None of any of this that you see every day happens without that long list of staff members, from your team leaders to your MCAs to your agent services folks. So all of them combined really make this all possible. So thank you to all of them, and thank you for each of you for utilizing them to help you connect with these new tools that we're moving to. Right? It's what you'll find is that if you're frightened of it, dive in anyway, because once you start pushing the buttons, it gets easier, and then you go back and push the buttons again, and it gets easier again. And then by the third time you're in there, you're like why was I ever fearful of this? Now I just know how to use it, right? The one that you're moving from, you didn't know how to use in the beginning either. So just always remember that learning is just a process to get you one step further. All right, guys. Yeah.
Where can I find that federal unemployment portal?
You can't, not until tomorrow. I'll let everybody know tomorrow once it opens. It will be on the Connecticut Department of Labor site, is what I'm told, but I don't have confirmation of that. And it is not open until tomorrow, and we don't know what time.
Okay.
All right, guys, have a lovely evening. For those of you who are finishing up Ignite with me, we start in 2 minutes. We'll start at 5:01. For the rest of you, have a lovely afternoon. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't miss 9 a.m. tomorrow. I hear it's going to be a spectacular one. See you soon, guys. Good afternoon. All righty. So let's get this thing done, shall we? Talk to me a little bit about, again, we're going to start right in today to finish everything up to get us through the buyer form. Talk about a couple of scripts to help buyers make faster decisions, and then we're going to dive into the anatomy of a buyer transaction. That's where we will finish for the night and for the course. And to talk to me a little bit about questions that came up or ahas that you had from when we went through the exclusive right to represent buyer, the ERRB document, and the script that goes along with it. What were your thoughts, concerns, ahas, things you never heard before? If you remember, we got through paragraph 7 on that document, which was the how I get paid portion.
Hey, Rick, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
It mentions the BINS system, Buyer Information Notification System.
So you're talking about the educate your buyers or value proposition pages, yes?
The value proposition pages, where
Right.
it discusses how we're going to utilize this system called BINS, and I've never heard of that before. Is that?
Yeah. So
old?
BINS is not necessarily a proprietary name. It's just a general description for buyer. I have to remember what it stands for now. Buyer Instant Notification System, I believe.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, good. And so what that is it's your listing book, or it's setting people up inside of Command to receive updates.
Okay.
That's all that is. There's a bunch of different versions of a buyer instant notification system. Does that help, John?
Yeah, I assumed it was something like that, but I just wanted to double check that there was something I didn't miss over the last few months.
Got it.
Thank you.
What else? You're welcome. Anything else? Ahas, questions, issues from what we did on Monday, specifically with the exclusive right to represent buyer document? No? You're all experts on that? I love that. So let's revisit paragraph 7 and just outline again the professional service fee. If you remember, we went through this right at the end on Monday, and we talked about the fact that 7A. Now, Raquel did have a question, which I did write down, so I will answer Raquel's question as soon as we run through this again. So 7A talks about, and again, I'm on the exclusive right to represent buyer document. 7A talks about the fact that we're due a fee. 7B quantifies the fee. 7C says that we'll look everywhere else before we look to you for the fee, which just, by the way, doesn't say we'll look everywhere else and not to you. It says we'll look everywhere else before you, right? And so if it doesn't come from someplace else, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, it does come from you. Remember, we started this conversation about this document, talking about a mindset shift for many of us into understanding that your buyers are responsible for your fee. Just like your sellers are responsible for your fee, your buyers are responsible for your fee. Oftentimes, we mitigate them actually writing a physical check by searching elsewhere. Typically, that means going through the MLS to get paid. But the buyers are, at the end of the day, responsible for your fee. 7D, any bonuses we can keep, and 7E, we get paid when title passes, which is at the closing, right? So any questions specifically about, other than the one that Raquel put on the table, which I'll answer in a second, any questions specifically about any of the paragraphs in paragraph 7?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any case where, because it's our job, I guess, to present a willing and able buyer or something like that, remember that correctly? Is there, and then if the deal falls through, is there then still a possibility that we would get paid anyways? I remember studying that when I did my license a long time ago, but.
Yeah, and so what it's a great question. What Nick is talking about ultimately is it really exists more on the list side, right? Most listing agreements state that we are due a commission upon the presentation of a ready, willing, and able buyer who meets the terms of the listing contract or any other terms that are agreeable to both parties, right? And so is there ever a time where you might present a buyer and 3 days before the closing, the seller says, I can't sell this house, and the whole thing falls apart? Is there ever an opportunity that you might get paid? Sure. It doesn't happen terribly often, mostly because that would require the listing brokerage, right? We don't get paid through the MLS until after it closes. So that would require the MLS, the listing brokerage, to exercise their right, if they have that right in their document with the seller, to go back to the seller and demand a fee. Sometimes we're asked to help keep things moving. We're asked to write a letter that says, if the seller backs out now 3 days before closing, Keller Williams Realty will absolutely demand a fee. And so we write that so that the listing agency can then bring that to the seller's attorney to say, look, they can change their mind. However, they're still going to have to pay $50,000 in commissions because we want ours and Keller Williams wants theirs for bringing the buyer. So sometimes they use that as a tool to help the seller realize the error of their ways and just go ahead and close. Rarely, though, Ninka, do we just automatically get, well, just understand, nothing really happens automatically in life. That's not the way life works. And so just like life, in business, the automaticness of, well, because we brought the buyer all the way through the closing that we get paid, that's just not the way it works, right? And so we'd have to take some specific steps. If that were to happen, you and I would sit and have a conversation. We'd have a conversation with the listing agency to see what their position was and see if there was a way to utilize our documentation to try and make something happen. Most of the time, however, in those situations, the listing agency, and that means when we're the listing agency as well, my advice to many of you has been, in that circumstance, it's one thing if the seller wakes up one morning and says, you know, I'm in a bad mood, I'm not going to sell my house. That's not typically what happens. Typically, if they make a decision 3 days before closing not to sell the house, it's because of some event that is a tragic event or a destructive event. I've had seller clients who have lost children days before the closing, or have had children become very, very ill. And so as the listing agency, you then have to weigh the pros and cons when those things come up, to stomp your feet and say, sorry, you can't do that. We're gonna charge you a commission anyway. That's the difference between taking a stand for a transaction and taking a stand for a relationship, right? And my advice almost all the time is to take a stand for the relationship, which means we're with you in the long haul here. We understand that. Let me see what I can do to make sure you don't have any exposure on the other side of this, but you don't have any exposure on our side. Does that help answer that?
Rick, when would that letter be sent out to the listing agency should it be a circumstance where they've just changed their mind?
I'm sorry, ask the first part of that question again, Lisa.
You said there is a letter, you know, if the situation is, you know, not a human situation, it's just, I've changed my mind, I've decided I don't want to move. When would you send that letter out to the listing agency to say, we still expect our commission?
So generally speaking, it's a conversation between the buyer's agent and the listing agent, and then between the brokers of those two offices to figure out what the story is, and if there's a concerted effort by the brokerages to move ahead and say, look, we're going to ask for our commission, it would happen from those conversations. So if that happens to you, get me involved, because it's typically something that needs to be handled brokerage to brokerage, that we then escalate to their attorneys and then see what we can do from there. Any other questions on the paragraphs at number 7?
Rick,
Yes.
it's Cindy. I have a question. I don't have the form in front of me, but did I get it right that it says our fee is generally 3%?
So yes, 7B talks about the fact that our professional service fee is 3% or 5%, depending on whether it's on or off the MLS, right? So on the MLS, it's 3%, and anything not on the MLS is 5%. So let's talk about that a second, because that was Raquel's question, if you remember right at the tail end of our session on Monday. And her question was, many of the listings that are offered out on the MLS are offering out less than 3%. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes, that is true, right? It's a fact. If you ran all the listings in Fairfield County, a majority of them would be offered out at 2.5%, right? Some at 2.75, some at 3, some at 3.5, some at 2, some at flat fees, but the majority of them offered out at 2.5%. And so Raquel's question was, well, how do you deal with that? How do you reconcile that? Are you always asking buyers to make up the difference? And so that's the piece that I wanted to spend some time on today, because it is an opportunity for each of you as business owners to understand what rights you have and what opportunities you have, but also how to do it fairly. So my simple answer to Raquel with that question is, when I worked with buyers, no. I was always willing to accept 2.5% as my fee. My document covered me for 3%. However, when the fee that came through the MLS was 2.5%, there was no conversation to be had, because I was always willing to accept that. Less than 2.5%, then I wasn't so happy anymore, right? Depending on the price point, I sometimes accepted 2.25 if it was a higher price point, because then the dollars were at least made up. But I wasn't willing to accept 2, and I wasn't willing to accept 1 or 1.5 or anything like that. And so I utilized that dialogue from that script to set the stage with the buyers that says, so generally speaking, we get paid via all these other avenues. There may be some opportunities, however, that pop up where either there's no compensation offered or it doesn't meet my requirements. And so if that's the case, we'll have a conversation before you ever set foot in that property, and I'll let you know, right? So if I'm working with Fiona, I'll give her a call and say, hey, I sent you 3 new properties that we should really absolutely go out and see tomorrow. I just want to let you know, if you remember, we had that conversation about a select few properties having an issue around commission. Well, that one at 123 Main Street, Fiona, that's one of those. And so I just want to let you know that if you were to purchase that property, because the seller is unwilling to pay me the requisite commission, you'll have to make up 0.5% on that one, or a full percent, or whatever that is. Knowing that, are you still interested in moving forward and seeing it? So you see, that conversation happens before you get in the car, before they're standing in the front doorway saying, oh my goodness, I love this house. Because once that happens, that's not fair to then say, oh, well, I'm glad you like it. By the way, you also have to pay me $8,000 more because my commission isn't covered by the seller. Right? But if you have that conversation as part of your consultation, so that they know that it is possible. By the way, I used to call it cheap seller syndrome. That was my term for it. It's not in your script, so if you want to write that down, you can. I called it cheap seller syndrome. I just blamed the seller, right? So then my phone call would be to Fiona. Hey, Fiona, I just sent you 3 properties we should absolutely go out and see tomorrow. The one at 123 Main Street suffers from cheap seller syndrome. Do you remember when we talked about cheap seller syndrome? And Fiona says, oh, not really. So, well, that's when the seller is unwilling to pay my commission in full, thinking that it saves them money, right? And so, unfortunately, in order to see that property, one of 2 things is going to happen. You're either going to have to authorize me to ask for my full commission as part of the offer, or you need to be willing to make up the difference. Because sometimes some of you have the idea of, well, I'll just ask the listing agent for more in the offer, which you can absolutely do, as long as your buyer has given you the authorization to do so first. You do not have a right to sabotage their offer, because that's what you're doing, right? You don't have a right to sabotage their offer without their permission. And the reason I say sabotage is because in many cases, the seller looks at that and says, well, that's not really the amount of the offer, right? The amount of the offer is $8,000 less, because you're asking for $8,000 more, and it puts them at a negative negotiating position. So if they authorize you to do that because they don't want to have to write a check and they really do want to see that one, well, then great. Then that's how you do it.
Rick, would this fall under the same script for short sales / foreclosures?
Keep asking that question, because I think the answer is no, but I want to make sure I understand fully the question.
I'm just wondering if you you take a buyer to look at a short sale property. Would you have the same discussion about the commissions should it not be covered under the short sale? Am I in the right place?
Got it. Okay, so yes, thank you for the clarification. And so the answer is it might come into play in a short sale, right? If all of a sudden you're having the conversation generically, right? Remember, we're talking about your buyer consult now. And so the conversation gets had generically based on step number 6, which is close for the agreement. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, there may be certain circumstances, such as my showing you are for sale by an owner or a home that, for some reason, is offering little to no compensation to the buyer's agent. That reason could be a cheap seller. It could be a short sale scenario. It could be a lot of different scenarios. Generally speaking, I don't find that low commissions show up on the foreclosure side when you're dealing with REOs, because banks know that they have to pay agents a reasonable fee. So I don't find that comes up much there. And frankly, I don't see it show up all that often on the short sale side. Every once in a while, in certain scenarios, they will ask for a reduction. But generally speaking, you're getting paid anywhere from 2.5% to 3% on the short sale side. But the answer to your question, Stephanie, is yes, it is possible that it could show up there. That's why you're having the generic conversation at the consultation, so that if it does all of a sudden show up, you get to have a further conversation so that it's not an ambush at the end. Does that help, Stephanie?
Hey, Rick, I thought
Yes, thank you.
Fannie years ago had said that they would pay that 2.5% on their loans back in like 08, 09.
That's not really a Fannie or a Freddie decision to make. It's really a decision that well, I guess if they're federally backed loans, the investors are typically then the government. I don't know the answer to that, Lisa. And I, like I said, it doesn't happen terribly often. So right. I wouldn't get too wrapped up in who's paying what, because for the most part, they're paying a reasonable wage.
So I have one last question. So
Yeah.
I was doing some searches for a client, high-end luxury, and I was finding that they are all quoting 2%.
Yeah.
And I heard that this is a new trend now, that if it's a luxury property, that they're willing to pay, they're only willing to pay less. Would that be a situation where you would say, hey, it's 2.5%, either that goes in with the offer, with your client's permission, or the client has to pay that out, or would you let it go because it's significantly higher?
So a couple of things on that, and that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. It covers a bunch of different things. The first thing is this conversation with your buyers, once you've set the stage for it, you get to make the decision about when you implement it and when you don't, right? And so again, for me, it was anything less than 2.5%, my antenna would go up. And the first thing I would do is I would do the math, right? That's the tail end of what Lisa just said. Do the math, because it's not always about the percentage, right? 2% of a $5 million property is still not a bad wage, right? For the work that you're doing. And so 2% of a $2.5 million property is still not a bad wage, right? 2% of a $195,000 condo, that to me is a little bit, now I want somebody to make up the difference, right? And that's a scenario where offering out at 2%, I might ask the buyer for the extra 1% as per my contract, right? So that I'm earning a decent wage for the time that I'm spending. I always encourage you, whether it's in this scenario or you're being asked to contribute money. Now, please don't leave here and say, Rick said, give away your money, because Rick very hardly ever says, give away your money. What Rick says is, do the math and see if it makes sense, right? I'm mostly a do the math guy. And so if you do the math and you're still looking at earning $18,000, even if you're giving up $1,000, does that make sense in your business, right? It's just a business decision. And are you certain that if you say no, that other $18,000 is truly at risk, right? Those are scenario by scenario circumstances that you need to weigh the pros and cons of. The high end in general, I would say I'm not sure yet that's necessarily a trend. I think that there are high-end properties that are offering more than 2%, and there are properties that are offering 2%, and there are properties that are offering some flat fees. I've seen some flat fees on high-end properties, right? Everyone's trying to mitigate loss, right? That's what, especially in the high end, the last couple of years has been an attempt to mitigate loss, because there's hardly anybody making money in the high end right now. And so if they're looking to mitigate loss, they may look to reduce commissions. You have to decide whether or not you're willing to accept that, either on the buy side with your buyers, because your document says 3%, or with your sellers. So hopefully I answered, I think there was a string of questions in all that. There's at least a string of discussion points, and I appreciate them being put on the table, because they bring us to exactly where we need to be, which is, you get to make the decision. And just because your document says 3% doesn't mean that you have to go and charge everybody who you work with extra money at the closing table. You're always in control of that. You could never do that. The commission could say 1.5%, and you could just say that's fine, right? The flip side of that question, I don't necessarily encourage the that's fine, at least not without a conversation, right? And remember, if you haven't set the stage that this is a possibility in your consultation, it gets very difficult, if not close to impossible, to engage the buyer when it actually comes up and have it come out positively. Because it kind of sounds like an ambush at that point in time. So if you haven't had the conversation, if you're working with buyers right now and you haven't had this conversation, that ship may have sailed for you if all of a sudden you have a 2%er come up. Some of you will look at that and say, you know what, I will never ask a buyer for money ever. And that's okay. That's your business that you get to make a decision on. I just want to make sure that you each recognize that there is a conversation to be had if you have it correctly and have it up front and then again prior to a showing that can get you paid the differential for a low commission property. I've done it successfully 3 different times in my own career, and I've coached many of you to successfully do it with your own buyers. So I know it's possible. And I'll give you just a quick example of the first time I ever did it. I started having the conversation early on because I knew what I was worth, and I wanted to make sure that people understood that I was willing to fight for what I was worth. And so I prepped everybody for it and never used it until I got to, it was probably 2003 or 4. The market was moving very, very quickly. And the short version of the story is I sold the same buyers 6 houses and only closed on 1. 6 houses. The first 5, so again, it was 2003 or 4. The market was moving very, very quickly, right? And so they kept, one of the things that I was good at was helping my buyers win at multiple offers. And part of the way we won is by spending more money, because sometimes to win, you have to just spend more money. That's just one part of the game sometimes. And I wasn't afraid to tell them that part of the game to win a multiple offer situation is to spend more money. Sometimes I hear from agents the conversation of, I have these buyers who are so frustrated they keep losing multiple offer situations because they're unwilling to spend more money. Oh, yeah, that's right. There's no secret there, right? It's not magic. Sometimes in order to win, you have to just be willing to spend more, right? I'll give you a script for that before we finish tonight, because there is a way to help them see that opportunity sooner. So my point is, the first 5 that we went through, we won each of the 5. And then one by one, they woke up the next morning and thought, oh, do we really want to spend that much money on this house? I don't think so. And they backed out. We inspected 3 of them, the one we closed on plus 2 others. And there were inspection issues that derailed them on 2 of them. So by the 6th time that something came on the market and I said, this is absolutely the house these people should buy. And I called them and said, okay, you need to leave work. I'll meet you at this house on Bald Hill Road in Wilton. I remember like it was yesterday. At noon, because this is the house you will purchase. Oh, and by the way, before you leave your office, do you remember that conversation we had a couple of weeks ago when we first met about cheap seller syndrome? Well, this house suffers from cheap seller syndrome. And by that, I mean they're only offering a 2% commission. I'm certain you would agree that I have worked hard enough for you to earn my full 3%. And so if you want to see this property, it will mean that you'll have to write a check for the extra 1% at closing, because I do not encourage you to have me go in and adjust the offer, because I knew there'd be multiple offers. It was just the way the market was. So I don't encourage you to do it that way. Instead, if you want this, let's fight for it, and know that you'll have to write a separate check for an additional $8,000. Let's negotiate knowing that there's an extra $8,000 cost to you here at the closing. And they said, we'll meet you there. And they bought that house. It was an $800 and something thousand house. They wrote me a check for like $8,400 at the closing. Well, they wrote my brokerage a check, right, for $8,400 at the closing, because that was the house they wanted to buy. So do know that the conversation is not a loser of a conversation. It's actually a winner of a conversation. And it's something that you shouldn't shy away from unless you haven't set it up properly. If you haven't set it up properly, then I would shy away. If you've set it up properly, then dive right in, know when to use it, and don't be afraid to use it. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes. Rick, one quick question. So if
Yeah.
you're in that situation, they've obviously signed the buyer agreement, but then you've separately agreed the extra 0.5%, 1%. Ahead of going into the property, do you put all that in writing just to cover yourself?
So great question. The good news is you already have it in writing. Your buyer agreement already says that you earn 3% and they're responsible for it. And so when the MLS is willing to cover 2% of it, the buyer document by default covers the extra 1%. So if you already have this buyer agreement signed with them, you don't need anything else. You've already got everything you need. Isn't that a beautiful thing? You don't even have to make a big deal out of it and have an extra signature, right? Because this document already says what you are due. You just subtract out the MLS piece from it. Does that help that, Fiona?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Raquel, did I answer your question? Is Raquel on? I have to say.
Hi, yeah, yes. And I also called Dan yesterday because I had an issue with that. Or not an issue, just something came up, regarding that. And he explained it, so I get it.
Got it. Okay, perfect. And thank you for bringing it up on Monday because it's an important conversation. And it's a question that many people have, right? Now, can you alter this document when you're sitting in front of a buyer? If the buyer's giving you a really hard time about 3%, can you alter it to say that your fee is 2.5 and 5?
Yes.
Yeah, of course you can. Every single day. Just do it properly, cross out the 3, write in 2.5 and initial it. Again, I don't encourage you to do that. I encourage you to get better with objection handling and helping people understand that just because it says 3% here, right? See, one of the things that you have to recognize is many of you operate with this thought process, this mindset that everyone on the planet knows what we talked about going into this conversation, which is that if you ran a report, most of the properties out there are offered out at 2.5%. There's only one way that buyers actually know that information. How?
From us.
Yes, the big mouths of real estate agents, right? So if we would stop having these conversations around earnings and around commissions and stop giving out documents to people that have 2.5 written in, that's why they have a buyer version of those documents, right? The agent version is for you. Then we wouldn't be put in these positions, right? And that's not to say that we're hiding information from people, because you get to make a choice about what you earn. You could decide that your fee for service for buyers is 3.5%. Alter the fee the other way. You get to make the decision. You get to make the choice. You just have to be prepared to then support that choice, knowing that you may be asking for something that is out of the ordinary. Any other questions on how we get paid and how to utilize how we get paid to your advantage if it comes up? Let me restate that. To create a level playing field, to create fairness in what you get paid, should it come up. Because frankly, I think you all work way too hard to have a listing agent's inability to have a commission conversation affect your income. Because oftentimes that's what it is. It's a weak listing agent who accepts a weak commission. And I don't think that should affect your income. So recognizing that you have the opportunity to level a playing field with this conversation, I think is an important one. It's part of you getting to a point in your business where these documents that we talk through, you get to wield them as tools, right? Instead of being afraid of them. And trust me, I have been in both spots. I have been afraid of the listing contract and I have been afraid of this document in all transparency. Because in the beginning, before I knew how to use them well and really wield them as tools, I was always afraid someone would challenge me on them and I wouldn't know what to say. So that's just a learning process where you master these documents and get to use them. And so when I'm sitting across from Kim and she asked me a question about, my understanding is that I'm not responsible for the commission. I stopped saying, yes, that's right, you're not responsible. And I start saying, oh, that's interesting. I'm curious, where did you hear that? Oh, well, a friend of mine who bought in Connecticut told me. Got it. Well, here's the reality. As you can see with this document, you are absolutely responsible for the fee that gets paid to me. However, you're not necessarily responsible for writing the check. You're responsible for making sure that the fee gets paid, and generally speaking, you and I do that together through the MLS. And what I mean by that is that typically my compensation is offered as an incentive through the multiple listing service by the listing agency. And so for all intents and purposes, like 98% of the time, your responsibility to cover my fee is mitigated by the fact that we just offer it through the MLS. We accept it through the MLS. But I'll tell you, I wouldn't say to a buyer, you're not responsible. Because I've had that happen too, where if someone said in writing, you're not responsible for my fee, and then they got cheated on, the buyer went and bought something at an open house through somebody else, and then came to me and said, I'm in contract with this person, can you go after my fee? And I said, sure. And so I did my usual do, and I made a phone call, and I was told, well, the agent said I wasn't responsible, and they put it in writing. Here's the email or the text, I forget what it was. Understand, you've now given me nothing to fight with. It's like you stripped me naked and pushed me out into the arena with all the tigers and the gladiators or whatever. Right, you gotta give me something to fight with. Okay, let's finish this document and then move forward with our anatomy of a buyer transaction. So we were on statement number 8, which talks about 2 things, lien rights and fair housing, both of which you already know what they are, right? In the state of Connecticut, we do have lien rights. Let me talk about lien rights for 90 seconds. You have lien rights both on the list side and on the buy side. And when I say you, I really mean me, right? The brokerage has lien rights for the express purpose of assisting in getting paid should something go sideways. In 21 years in business, somebody tell me how many times I have exercised our lien rights. 0 times is exactly the right answer. And the reason is because the lien rights in the state of Connecticut are very poorly written. They are in order to actually exercise them, you have to be like clairvoyant and know 3 days before someone makes a decision that they're going to make that particular decision. Instead, here's what I would encourage you to do. Know it says it there, so if someone says, what does that mean? You get to say, the state of Connecticut does grant our brokerage the right to lien properties in order to enforce these documents in case someone decides not to pay us what we are due. That's the answer to what does that mean? My answer for you is just choose to be better at what you do and choose to have direct communication and conversation with buyers and sellers. Choose to get ahead, voluntarily get out ahead of problems, and instead offer to have a face-to-face or minimally a phone-to-phone meeting with someone to work out the issues. Right, I learned that from Mo Anderson, who when Mo Anderson was the first CEO of Keller Williams Realty International after Gary stepped down from the job in the early 90s. And she was the CEO for about 10 years. And Mo's claim to fame during that massive time of growth, and when she stepped into the CEO role, the first thing she had to do was clean some house. She got rid of operating partners, team leaders, some regional directors, right? So she put herself in harm's way by cleaning house a little bit. And then for 10 years, with massive growth happening inside of this organization, her claim to fame was that Keller Williams Realty was never sued that went to court. That doesn't mean the organization wasn't sued, right? It's a national franchise system. It gets sued all the time. However, under her watch, she preferred to solve problems the way I just explained. She would get on a plane and fly out to meet with somebody and say, okay, what's the issue? Now, we're not talking about a buyer document, right? We're talking about brokerage, national franchise issues. But she would go and have a personal meeting and work it out. She would get on the phone with the right players and work it out. And so what I learned from her is just because you can sue doesn't mean you should sue. And just because you think you're in the right doesn't mean that you should put up a wall and say, you want to sue me? Go ahead, I dare you. Right? And depending on your personality profile, right, that's tough for some of you. It was certainly tough for me. Push me into a corner. You don't get a happy, smiley Rick back, typically, until or unless I stop and think for a moment about what would Mo do, right? And when I think through what would Mo do, then we start to have conversations around a conversation. How do we work this out? Make sense? And B, of course, fair housing. We all just finished our CE on fair housing, so we all know fair housing laws, and it's built for you right under number 9, all the protected classes in the state of Connecticut and federally, and everything we do has to fall within fair housing guidelines. Number 9 talks about if we have to go after you, you get to pay our costs and attorney's fees. That's in there mostly to encourage people not to decide to go to court, right? Because when you add that clause in, what it does on both the list side and the buy side is encourage people to figure out how do we settle? How do we not go to court? Because nobody wants to run the risk of losing, being liable for the damages and for the other party's attorney's fees and court costs as well. That could add tens of thousands of dollars to the bill. And then everybody signs at the bottom and you're all done. Any questions, comments, concerns on the buyer document? All right, I will take that as a sign that you are all now experts on utilizing that document. Here's what I would encourage you to do. Practice it. And practice it as part of the buyer consultation, right? Practice it as part of the buyer consultation. Go back and read step 6 again, close for the agreement. And see how it just kind of hovers right over the document so that you can utilize that script instead of going line by line through your exclusive right to represent buyer doc, right? There may be some buyers who like to go line by line, and that's okay. And yet most of the time you can utilize that script as a shorter version of what the document actually says and still feel and be able to say in court, if you were ever asked, yes, I explained this document, because that script explains this document without having to go word by word, line by line. It explains it in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of common sense what this document is really about. It's pretty clear. Make sense to everybody? Because here's what you can't do. You can't not explain the document and then expect to enforce it, just by the way. If you don't do some version of an explanation and somebody cheats on you, you don't get to have a commission on that. Because you can't prove that you did it. The other thing I would encourage you to do is do a consultation with everyone. Not just because it's a really good idea, but because you're now treating everyone the same. And when you get somebody who's kind of a jerk and says, I never got a copy, I never did this, I never knew that I was indebted to you for this, I never knew that it was this territory, blah, 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 right? When you start to hear the blah, 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 you know you do it the same with every single person. And you can sit in a courtroom with your right hand on a Bible and say, I do it the same with every single person, and have been doing it this way for X number of years, right? It's completely unreasonable to think that this one time with this one particular buyer, I didn't do it that way, right? That's the importance of setting up your systems for the what if that happens on the tail end.
Rick, on
Yes,
buyer
ma'am.
broker agreements, I started thinking about, as I go through line by line each paragraph, that I'm having the buyer initial it, stating that I went through it thoroughly with them. And if they had any questions, that was the time, and then they initial beside. And I know that's a lot of initials, but I've had a buyer in the past say, oh, I had no idea what I signed, just to get out and go use another agent.
Yeah. Well, and so the good news is that may have been, so I don't think that having them initial each of the paragraphs is a bad idea. For some buyers, it may be overkill, right? We purposely have an initial on the bottom of the first page exactly for that reason, because we were having people say things like, well, the agent never went through the first page with me. They only had me sign. I only saw this page. So that's why we have the initial at the bottom of page 1, so that there is recognition that they have seen both sides because they've written some version of their name on both sides, right? And if you're looking for additional layers of protection, you can certainly have them initial over and above just that one at the bottom of the page. All right, I sent out earlier today the anatomy of a buyer transaction. I do want to run through that with you before our time ticks out. And so if you didn't have that in your email, if you didn't retrieve that from your email, it was sent out earlier this afternoon so that you can retrieve that now. And we're going to skip right through to number 8, because the first part is lead generate, which we talked about, get the appointment, which we talked about, do the consultation, right? Have a conversation about financing, right? Showing homes. Oh, let me talk about this real quick. I want you to start utilizing language with your buyers that helps the buyer understand the point of you spending time together. So to that, I would encourage you to stop showing homes. Instead, when you head out with a buyer, I want you to start using language that specifically tells them what the outcome's going to be. So if I'm finishing up with Donna and she's now signed the document, and you always reward and validate, right? Thank you so much, Donna. I think you're making a great decision. I think we're going to do beautifully together. Now, what do you say we go take a home off the market? That's the message you want to send, right? Every time I'm heading out with Donna, I'm not going to say, let's go see some more homes, right? This isn't a shopping afternoon, right? Sometimes you wander around the mall and you never buy anything. That is not my idea of spending time with a buyer, right? Spending time with a buyer is about let's remind them what they hired us to help them do. That's not being pushy, because they hired you to do that with them, right? They made that decision. And so let's just remind them of that. Make sense? As you hit each property, I would encourage you to ask a question after every single property that they see. And the question I would encourage you to ask is, so I'm curious, is that a property you think you might want to purchase? That's a different question than, what did you think? That's a different question than, oh my goodness, could you believe the carpeting in the living room? By the way, you don't get to have negative opinions about any house. They can, but you don't get to have that. I have made that mistake. I have been in a house with people and I walked into a room and said, whoa, mama, what do you think of these paint colors? And she said, I know, right? I love them. Like, oh, yeah, that's what I meant. Right? So there's just no reason to have a comment on it because it's their purchase. I am looking in the chat. There are a couple of people who are saying they didn't receive them. So if somebody could be so kind, if you did receive them and you have your email available, if you could forward them to the email addresses in the chat box, that would be so helpful. Thank you so much.
Done.
Thank you. And so the other thing that I would encourage you to do, I always liked this because it was visual. When we would leave a house, you had the MLS sheet, right? You ask the question. So I'm curious, is that a home that you could see yourself purchasing? Right? We already said that the goal was to go take a house off the market. Now we're asking them if this is something they would purchase, right? You see the language we're using, right? Buy, 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 buy. Well, no, I don't think so. Great, tell me about that. What would it have to have in order for you to purchase it? Like, don't tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me the things, because that's a waste of time, right? Talking about what's wrong with the house. Talk about the things that it needs to have in order to be a yes, right? Because now we can go and seek out those things. And so when we get to the comment, so Donna tells me that, well, it didn't really have a fireplace, and I really love that fireplace. Yeah, it was missing that fireplace. Other than the fireplace, is there any reason you think that you wouldn't purchase this property? Well, you have the yard. The yard's kind of a cliff, and I really do need more of a flat space for the reasons we talked about. Got it. So this one, compared to this one to the first one we saw, gun to your head, if you had to purchase one of them, which would you buy? Oh, definitely the first one. Got it. So now this is number 2, right? Donna already told me the reasons she wouldn't buy it. She told me she's not interested in purchasing it. And compared to the other one, she would purchase number 1. So then the script I would use with this listing sheet goes like this. Excellent. Just get rid of it. Because remember, the whole point of being out with someone is helping them eliminate all the properties that don't work for them. You're not really searching for the one. You're eliminating all the ones that aren't the one. Because at some point, they get down to the point of, you know what, that number 1, that just is kind of it. And the second they see one that maybe they don't think they want to purchase, but it beats out number 1, well, now you're going to crumple up number 1 and throw that one over your shoulder. The backseat of my car was always full of crumpled up pieces of paper, because that's when I did that conversation with them, is driving to the next property. Right? We always got to have some fun with it, but psychologically it was helping them narrow things down. Do you ever have buyers say to you, oh, I'm so confused, I don't even remember which one is which? Right? That doesn't happen as much if you help them eliminate things. Take them out of your mind. Let's only focus on this one. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool beans. All right. Now let's move to the anatomy of a buyer transaction. So number 8 starts with writing up the offer. And you're going to write up the offer with a cover letter, right? We've kind of talked about this already on the seller side. We'll touch on it briefly here. Writing a cover letter for your buyer's offer does what for you and for the offer? A bunch of different things. Somebody just shout them out. What does it do?
Makes it more real for the seller.
So it absolutely sets the offer apart, right? If there are other properties, it sets it apart because not everybody does a cover letter. What else does it do?
It tells people that you're a professional.
100% agree, right? So there's a level of professionalism which only elevates the offer again, right? You're doing these things to help the clients stand out. And so when the agent on the other side or the seller believes that this is better put together, it's clearly someone who does this for a living instead of a hobby, right? These are all subconscious things that the seller is noting to help them move forward. What else? It's an easy way for both the listing agent and the seller to get a quick summary of the offer, right? Without having to go through 17 pages of stuff. So the cover letter talks a little bit about the clients to humanize them a bit without disclosing confidential information, as we talked about, and then summarizes the main bullet points of the offer. That's all. It's simple and quick. You can write it yourself. I used to have just a little form letter that I would kind of move pieces around. You can ask the buyers to write it if you so choose. If you write it, I would have the buyers just read it before you send it to make sure that they're okay with what you're writing. And here's the power of that. I will tell you a story. I one time represented buyers. They were purchasing a home in Ridgefield that had 7 other offers on it. We were one of 8 offers. And I did my little magic trick to help them move in a direction of offering the most money as well as the best terms. and they fell a little short. There were at least 2 other offers that were offering more money. And my cover letter said very specifically, Mr. and Mrs. Smith are so excited to make an offer on your property. It seems like from the pictures we've seen that you've raised 2 children here. They're excited to raise their 2 children here. You know, side note, their oldest, Jonathan, is going to be 6 or so by the time the closing happens, and they are about to have their second. And so the sellers read that and were so excited to be able to not have this woman who they pictured as this 8.5 months pregnant woman wandering around the streets because she didn't get the house, right? Not get the house, that they chose that offer because of what was written in the cover letter more than just the price. Because as I said, there were at least 2 other offers who had offered more money. Now, here's what was fabulous about that. The buyer was not pregnant. Now, I think I've said a number of times, honesty comes first. So how do you reconcile what I wrote with the fact that she wasn't pregnant? Two weeks after the closing date, they were heading to Florida to adopt their second child. And so what I wrote was completely true and honest. It just wasn't 100% of the information. They were expecting their second child, right? And so, and it was funny because when the listing agent came back to me and said, you know what, they're going to go with the buyers you represent, mostly because they so connected with the fact that she's pregnant. Now, I cannot tell a lie. Well, I choose not to tell a lie. I know how to do it. I choose not to tell a lie. When the listing agent said they chose yours mostly because your client is pregnant, I didn't say yes, no, or different at that moment in time because we hadn't signed the binder. So I just heard what she said and then asked a question and said, I'm curious, when can we expect the signed binder? Which we received an hour later, got it signed, got it all back. And then when the listing agent showed up at the house for the inspection, at that moment in time, she could well have said, kind of slim for a pregnant woman, don't you think? And you know what? It never came up again. It never came up again. No one ever asked. No one ever, she clearly wasn't pregnant. And it never came up again, right? Because for everyone else, that moment had just passed. The sellers chose the buyers they thought were going to be the best buyers for them, and that moment had passed. And then by the time the closing happened, it had been discussed that they were heading out down to Florida to adopt their second child. So by the time the closing happened, everyone knew exactly what was going on. But so my point is, don't get stuck in the details. That's kind of the point of that story. Use facts, but don't get stuck in the details, because facts can help you. Details can sometimes derail you. All right. And then everything else you see there as a part of that offer, you're going to write up the offer on one of the documents that you have available to you with a 1% binder check. Just a quick fact check, the 1% binder check in our state, does the law say 1% is a must? It does not, right? It does not. It can be $50, it can be 10% if they want to make a point, right? It can be whatever it is they want. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I encourage buyers to do to win multiple offers is, if you're going to put down 10%, well then do it all now. Show them how willing you are to write a bigger check. And if you write a bigger check than other people, you look more serious, and so therefore, I think you do better, right? So I just encourage people to put more money down sooner. And then, of course, all the disclosures. Number 9, present the offer to the listing agent. If geography permits, deliver the listing to the agent in person, only because you get to have a conversation, you get to read body language, you know that they actually received it, right? There's a whole lot of benefits if you do it in person. If geography doesn't permit, please make sure that you're sending it over as a PDF. But then please do me a favor, push send, and then pick up your phone and push dial and call the listing agent and say, hey, Fiona, it's Rick Scott. I just wanted to make sure you received that offer for 123 Main Street. I just sent it about 2 minutes ago. And Fiona says, oh, I'm sure I did. I've struggled with sometimes people not receiving things. Could you just verify for me? Just put me on hold real quick and make sure you got it. As a matter of fact, if you have a minute, do you want to just open it and take a look at it and see if you have any questions? I'd be happy to answer them. I am going to encourage everyone within the sound of my voice to start using your phone more. And I don't mean your thumbs on your phone more. Start using your phone more. Before phones were cameras and computers and texting machines, they were communication devices. And one of the things that I think that we have gotten so far away from in our industry, for reasons, for what seems like convenience, is actually speaking to one another. And I get that sometimes it's hard to get people on the phone, whether they be clients or other agents. I wouldn't tolerate it. I would figure out a way to make sure, first of all, set that expectation right up front. So if I have Fiona on the phone, then checking the deal, I'm going to ask her right now, because I think this is number 10. Yep. I'm going to ask her right there before I let her go. Fiona, I'm curious, when do you think the buyers will hear back from the sellers? I want Fiona to commit to a time frame to get back to me. She knows the schedule of the sellers. She knows when she's heading over there. She knows what she's going to do, right? So I want to know what that is. And if she says, it's 1 o'clock now, Rick, I know they get home from work around 5:30. We're going to talk around 6:30, so certainly by 7. Great. At 6:58, if I haven't heard from Fiona, I'm making another phone call to say, hey, it's Pesky Rick. I know you said 7 o'clock and I'm a few minutes early. I just wanted to see if you had any info for me. Keep it light. You get away with being more of a pest if you're kind-hearted about it and you keep it light. If you're jerky about it, you don't get away with it, right? And then people will shut you down, right? The second I'm jerky, Fiona's like, you know what? I will call you.
I feel it helps to build rapport by calling people. So, right?
110%. 110%. You've got to start talking to people more, right? If people say things like, you know what, I'm terribly sorry, I really only communicate via text, you need to have a script for that. You need to have an objection handler for that. I so appreciate that, Chris. Here's what I have learned. In my years in the business, experience tells me that this is not one of those times in your life to not be having personal one-on-one conversations with me. The stakes are too high, and frankly, the assets we're talking about, either selling or purchasing, are worth way too much money. Trust me when I say to you that I have a policy of phone-to-phone or face-to-face communication during this time period for a reason, because it is absolutely 110% in your best interest. So as not to irritate you with 17,000 phone calls, let's set up a system where we will speak at least twice a week until or unless there's an offer on the table, and then we'll have to speak more. What works best for you? You can certainly go out of your way to accommodate people. I will tell you that works less when you have volume, right? When you have volume on the list side, the conversation is, so Chris, I have conversations with sellers on Mondays and Thursdays, typically between 3 and 5 p.m. Can we make those times work? Right, I'm going to set the schedule and let Chris know when I'm going to be calling him. Go ahead, Kim.
I this past weekend, I was fortunate enough to have multiple offers on one of my listings. And I totally agree with the send one PDF document to the listing agent with your client's offer. I had 3 agents send me separate sheets from DocuSign or .loop. So I had like 4 emails from everyone, from these agents, one with the offer, one with the pre-approval. So I literally had to download from their electronic version to put everything together. And I had 14 offers. So it was like a juggling from Hades. And it would have been, and I really appreciated the agents who had one PDF with all the documents in it attached to an email.
Yeah. And so it's funny. First, it's funny because Kim Tromba unmuted. And so when I said, go ahead, Kim, I was expecting Kim Tromba's voice. And then I heard Kimberly and I thought to myself, wow, she does a really good Kimberly impression. That is crazy good.
Sorry, Kim.
Because I would never call you Kim. I would always call you Kimberly. And so Kim, I'll get to you in a second. And so from what Kimberly just said, don't be afraid. I mean, flipping back over to the listing agent side, right? That's really good. Since we're on the buyer side, that's really good advice for having all your ducks in a row. Flip over to the listing agent side one more time. Do not be afraid to set standards for buyer's agents when you are the listing agent. And what I mean by that is if it comes in incorrectly, kick it back, right? If it comes in and the math is wrong, like the first thing I used to do when I got an offer as a listing agent is check the math on the offer. If it's wrong, in the early days, I'd be like, oh, let me call and see if I can help fix it. No. Make a phone call. Hey, thank you so much for the offer. I can't quite make the math work. If you could take a look at that, work with the buyer and fix the math and get that back to me, I'll present it once the math is correct. Right? Don't be afraid to set standards as a listing agent as to how you want things to come in. If they're sending you piecemeal, don't be afraid to go back and say, hey, you know what? One PDF is going to really make this so much simpler and paint your buyers in a better light. Because this piecemeal thing is way too confusing, and I never know when the offer is complete. Like, how do I know that one more piece of paper isn't going to show up 20 minutes after I have a conversation with the seller? Right? Don't be afraid to set those standards and have those policies. It's not mean. It actually is helping buyer's agents be better at what they do when you set those standards as a listing agent and then hold people to it. Right? You're just asking people to step up their game a little bit, and it's in their client's best interest. It also happens to be in your client's best interest, and it saves you time. Number 11, monitor the response from the sellers. Again, so Fiona says 7 o'clock. I'm going to go back. Please, if you don't hear back, please don't come to me 3 days later and say, I am so angry. I gave this offer to Fiona Porter over at wherever place at ABC Realty, and well, I don't want to make Fiona be at ABC Realty. That makes me sad. So Jim Smith over at ABC Realty, and I haven't heard back. Because my next question is almost always going to be, I'm curious, when did you present the offer? Oh, I did it on Saturday. Okay, it's Wednesday. How many times have you called? Well, she told me she'd get back to me. I haven't called. And if you think I'm making these conversations up, I'm not making them up. Right? I hear these things from a lot of people who don't take a proactive approach to getting an answer for their buyers. Remember, you have anxious buyers. You've got to help those anxious buyers by over-communicating and setting standards and holding people to the things they say. When Fiona says 7, I'm calling it 7. If she says, you know what, I am so sorry, we still don't have an answer, great. Do you think you might have an answer by 8? Or should I call back at 7:30? Right? I want to know, I want the listing agent to engage back with me to let me know when they expect an answer, so that I can then take that information back to my anxious buyers, right? Any of you who have worked with buyers know that even a small bit of information that says, you know what, I just spoke to the listing agent, they are literally working on coming up with an answer for you now. It's probably another hour or so is what I'm told. Helps them be calm, right? Because that extra hour, if you don't tell them it's an extra hour, now they're anxious and they're nervous. right? I buy houses for a living on the other side of my world, in my investment property world, and I'm anxious. I want to know, right? As an investor, I'm supposed to be completely objective. I'm not supposed to care whether I get it or not. That's not how human beings behave. At least that's not how this human being behaves, right? When I make an offer, I made an offer because I want the property, and now I want to know. Those listing agents don't know what they're in for when they get an offer from me, because now I'm the buyer and the buyer's agent. Talk about a pain in the ass, but like in a nice, happy way. Okay, number 12, when a response comes back, take the information down, bring it back, communicate to the client objectively. This is not the place for an editorial. Here's what I mean by that. I overhear people on the phone saying things like this. So Rudy is my buyer. Hey, Rudy, it's Rick. Well, you're never going to guess what these stupid sellers did. I mean, yes, I have a counter. It's the most ridiculous counter you've ever heard. Why on earth would you set a tone that is so negative? Rudy doesn't know how to respond to a $5,000 counter. He's going to respond the way I tell him to respond. And he's going to take that information by my tone and how I deliver the information. If instead I call and say, hey, Rudy, guess what? We have an answer. I'm really excited to let you know that the sellers are looking to sell the house to you for less, currently $5,000 less than what they were asking for, which brings us closer together than we were. And so I'm curious, is that something you're interested in accepting, rejecting, or modifying by offering a new counter? Which path do you want to take forward, right? Accept, reject, modify. You have ARM all over again, ARM. And then Rudy gets to answer that. Now, he can be disappointed. Maybe he was hoping for a better counter. But if he's disappointed with me being upbeat about it, he still is taking cues from what I'm sending him emotionally. Don't be such a freaking downer, right? And here's the reason that some of you do that. Some of you do that to hedge your bets, because if I do that with Rudy, I'm trying to insulate myself from Rudy being upset with me. So I'm instantaneously blaming other people for the information I have to deliver to him, because I'm not being objective about it. I'm wrapped up in subjectivity and emotion, and I'm afraid if Rudy's upset, he'll somehow be upset with me. I didn't do a good enough job. Or guys, it's not about you. You've got to climb over that, because it's nothing to do with you. Objectivity is 100% of the game here. And positive communication with objectivity is the winner. Okay, I can't remember where we were. So 14, counsel your client understanding that it's their goal to be in this house. What that means is, please don't say things like, oh, I couldn't let you overpay for this house. Right? Because I go back and say to Rudy, $5,000 counter, and he says, you know what? This price range you showed me yesterday is moving pretty quickly. I think we need to say yes to that. Oh, I couldn't let you overpay for it. Are you kidding? That's not your business. Now, it's one thing if all of a sudden Rudy said, you know what, Rick, instead of where we were, let's offer $50,000 more on this $235,000 house just to make sure we get it. Now the conversation needs to be, okay, so $50,000 more, Rudy, let's have a couple of quick conversations. First and foremost, based on the work we did yesterday, do you believe that that is like crazy overvalued? And Rudy says, well, yeah, I saw it. I mean, that's the whole point. Okay, awesome. And so in that scenario, knowing that you're also looking for financing to purchase the house, you may run into the issue where the appraiser won't be able to appraise the house at that much money. And so are you willing to bring more money to the table, cash, and finance only the 80% that the property will appraise for, So are you willing to bring more cash to the table to make that work? And then Rudy gets to say yes or no to that. Okay, and last question, knowing that you may be way overbuying, are you okay knowing that if you have to sell this house quickly, like in the next 2 or 3 years, or you know, depending on the market, the next 5 years or so, that you may not get your money back if you choose to be a seller before the market has a chance to catch up to what you paid? And Rudy says, yeah, you know what, I get it, I'm willing to take that risk. Excellent, let's go forward. It's not for me to decide how to spend Rudy's money. It's for me to help Rudy understand the pros and the cons of what the decisions that he's looking to make. And my job isn't just to say, oh, $50,000 more, great. Until I've been through those 3 scenarios, right? Because those 3 scenarios are real scenarios that I need to make sure he understands. Once he understands them and gives me the thumbs up, we move forward, which is why number 14 says counsel the client, understanding that their goal is to be in that house. Right? All righty. So we're going to go back and forth. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because we're running out of time fast. Back and forth until we have some version of agreement. One of the things I want you to always remember, whether you're on the buy side or the sell side, is you need to remind your client that they have ARM, accept, reject, modify. Accept, reject, modify. Let me ask you this. Who has the most power in a negotiation? The buyer or the seller?
Whoever has the money.
Whoever has the money.
Whoever has the strongest agent.
Ah, so Kim's answer is whoever has the strongest agent. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm gonna say it depends on the market you're in.
Depends on the market you're in.
It's the people who I represent.
Yeah, there you go. I'm going to put Donna and Kim's answers together, right? Because if you do this well, the people who have the most power in a negotiation are your clients, because you're the one who keeps reminding the client that you represent that they have accept, reject, modify. They have ARM. If you continually tell your client that they get to call the shots on this, they by default feel as though they have the most power. And so they start to act as though they have the most power. That's like the psychology behind negotiating that nobody really talks about. Because it's very simple. You just have to make sure that the client you represent remembers that they get to say yes, no, or maybe so. The second you don't remind them of that and they feel like they've now lost control, that's when things get wonky on you. Does that make sense to everybody? So every single time that it comes back, right? So Fiona throws me something back, I'm going to go back to Rudy and tell him and remind him he has ARM. And then I'm going to throw it back to Fiona and it's going to come back to me. And when I bring the counter again to Rudy, I'm going to remind him, same script. You can accept it, reject it, or modify it. What do you choose to do? Right? Be more directive. We talked about this day one. This whole conversation is about being more directive. And being more directive as a buyer's agent means reminding your buyers what their opportunity is and that they retain control. Even on something that doesn't seem like they have any shot at getting. If they retain control, they've now made the decision. Right? If Rudy's making a $500,000 offer on a $700,000 house, and he's not willing to go any further than $550,000 and the deal doesn't come together, but I've constantly reminded him that he gets to either accept it, reject it, or modify whatever comes back from the seller, who has now made the decision to not purchase that property?
Client.
He has. So it doesn't come back on me. It's not about the seller and how unreasonable that person is, because all the decisions, and I underlined it every time, all the decisions were made by the buyer client, by my client who I represent. All right. So this is the one time I don't get to say, well, we didn't finish today, so we'll do it on Friday. So the good news is you have this whole document that you can spend all your time, all your extra time reading through. I'm going to just point out a couple of other highlights to this document so that we can finish on time. Make sure that the listing agent is reporting the property in the MLS within 48 hours once you have a signed agreement, right? They have 48 hours to get that to either show or deposit, depending on what you're signing. Follow up on that. That's your job as a buyer's agent, to make sure that that happens. And if it doesn't happen, you get to make a phone call, not a nasty phone call. You get to make a phone call, say, hey, Kim, it's Rick Scott. Hey, listen, I just got a phone call from the client asking whether the property has been reported as under agreement in the MLS, and it doesn't look like it has. I know how busy everybody is. I just wondered if you could have somebody take care of that. I would so appreciate it. Right? It's not an accusation. It's not a finger wag. It's just a, hey, could you do me a favor? Then if it doesn't happen, then the phone call is a little bit different, right? Hey, I noticed it still didn't get reported, and I have really anxious buyers who are concerned about additional offers coming in. I'm curious, is there a reason that the property hasn't been reported? Right? So you just keep after that. Make sure you get your binder checks into, right now we're still accepting them in the office. By the end of the summer, we will likely make a change and have you start writing those binder checks to the buyer's attorney. But right now we are still taking them inside of the office. We're not looking to change one more thing on you right at this very moment, right? So we have a lot of change going on, so we're going to keep that the same for now. And then, of course, have the buyer's attorney and the home inspectors all figured out beforehand. Don't have an accepted offer and then start having the buyer call and interview attorneys or interview inspectors. Know who those people are going to be as you're working with them, so that once the offer is done, you just have the names and you're scheduling. Bam, go for it. You're going to want to be, except maybe for now, attending the home inspection, attending the septic inspection. All right, all those reports are coming back to you, and the buyers. Here's what I want to say about home inspections. You want to wait until all those reports come back and sit down one time and go through all of those reports at the same time. Just like Kimberly was talking about the irritation of receiving things piecemeal as a listing agent, the same thing happens when buyer's agents give you piecemeal information about inspections. So we need this and this and this done from the home inspection. Okay, great, I'll talk to the seller. And then 2 days goes by, and then you get a septic report back, and then you go back and say, oh, and we also want this done on the septic thing. And then 2 more days goes by, and the radon comes back. Oh, we need to mitigate the rate. That is such a poor negotiating process, right? Because at some point the seller's like, okay, why am I saying yes to any of this? Because they just keep asking for more, right? You've got to look at it from the seller's perspective. So wait till you get all the documentation. Be communicative with the listing agent. Let them know where you're at. Not that there's nothing to talk about. And then sit down and have one conversation with the buyers and help them see that the shorter the list with the more intense items, the better. Buyers stand a higher chance of getting more important things done if they leave the stupid things off the list. And part of your job is to help them see that some of the silly things are just silly, right? Let me ask this. What in the state of Connecticut does a seller have a legal responsibility to address from an inspection perspective?
Structural health and safety.
So structural health and safety.
Nothing.
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 They can say no.
I think the nothings might have it, right? So make a note of this. In our state, we live in an as-is state, which means sellers do not have a legal responsibility to address anything. Nothing, including structural health and safety. Can a property convey with high radon? Yes, it absolutely can. Can a property convey if the front steps are all uneven and crumbly and it's a tripping hazard and a safety hazard? Mm-hmm. Yes, it absolutely can. right? So sellers have zero legal obligation to address anything that the buyers bring to the table. Now, they oftentimes recognize that not addressing some of these things is silly because almost any buyer is going to bring these to the table, right? But I want you to be really, really clear. Yes, Kimberly, even underground oil tanks, they don't have a legal responsibility to address that. It gets harder and harder. Oh, everyone just shifted. That was so weird. I was talking to Kimberly, then she went over there. How did you do that? She's like playing a video game with herself, moving around it's like Kimberly Pong, right? Am I dating myself? Remember Pong? Ding, ding. With an underground oil tank, there are certain things that it's harder to convey the property because attorneys get involved and health departments get involved, and sometimes it's harder to convey, and yet the seller still has no legal responsibility to address something prior to the close as a condition of the close, unless it's agreed to by both parties, is the point, right?
Rick?
Yes.
Hi, just two things on that. One, I'm amazed how many agents don't really realize that it's an as-is state. And so often when we're, giving an aggressive offer in a, bidding war as such, when we write as is, inspection for informational purposes only, well, that's the case anyway. But just putting that language in, I love how that elevates and, oh, wow, they're not going to ask for things. Of course, you can still ask for things, and we often do, but big things. And then number two, I want to point out is that, oh, I've totally lost my thought. I'll have to come back.
Yeah, so as you're gathering that, it's a really good point, Kim, and recognize that many licensees do not either know or believe that we live inside of an as-is state. And unfortunately, for many of them, that turns into, as buyer's agents, it turns into entitlement. And what I mean by that is they approach things as if the buyers are somehow entitled to have the sellers do things prior to the close or as a condition of moving the sale forward. My concern about that is that when you believe that, you advise the buyers to behave that way, right? And so if you're advising the buyers to behave that way, do you see how you're setting them up for failure inside of a negotiation, right? So you have to be really clear that if it were me, I would be having a conversation with my buyers pre-inspection and then post-inspection that went something like this. So Kim, I just want to remind us as we head into the inspections tomorrow that we do live, Connecticut is an as-is state, and so the seller has absolutely no legal obligation to address any issues that come up tomorrow at the inspection. Mostly inspections are done for the purposes of you understanding how to use your new house. It's kind of like a how-to guide. Now, that doesn't mean that if some major issues pop up, that we can't and won't have a conversation with the seller. However, I just want everyone to be clear going in that as a buyer, you're not entitled to have the seller address really anything. And what we do is we balance that out to make sure that the seller understands that some of these issues for you might be deal breakers. And we use that as some leverage to help you get some of those things corrected, right? I would be having that conversation. Let them know that there's no real obligation. Kim and then Kimberly.
So then the second thing is that I also use on the flip side as leverage that if something does come up like the radon and there's ever any pushback, which there never is, but anyway, is that now it's a material fact. So if they don't fix it for my buyers, they have to disclose that to future buyers. And I always am happy to remind them
Yes.
these big things come up that now they have to disclose them.
Yep, very true. And not only the they in that conversation is not just the sellers, right? With real material facts, the they in that conversation is the sellers and the listing agent, right? Because listing agents can't hide behind a wall of attorney-client privilege. Nope, Code of Ethics and licensing law says you have to disclose material facts, period, right? That's an uncomfortable conversation with your seller when you get to say, so I understand that you don't want to change the disclosure form, and yet every single person who comes to the house, I need to proactively let them know that this is an issue. because disclosure of material facts is a proactive disclosure. It's not reactive. You don't have to wait for it to be asked. It's a proactive disclosure. Oh yes, please come and show the property. Please note the septic system is completely failed. Have a happy Tuesday, right? So after the inspection, the basement is finished. Do we need to ask for the CO? So yeah, permits and COs are another layer of all of this that occurs with the town and with attorney involvement to make sure that the property can convey without issue to the buyers. So yeah, I would be their attorney should do something called a municipal search, and the municipal search will oftentimes unearth CO issues or permitting issues that have to be handled prior to the closing. All right, guys, I want to be true to our time here, and we are out of it. So we didn't get through the entire anatomy of the buyer transaction. You have the rest of it that you can read through. If you have questions, certainly do let me know. I know this was a little bit of a disjointed Ignite, and yet I hope it was at least a valuable way to spend time 3 nights a week for the last couple of weeks to get us from the very beginning of mindset around running a business to all the way through our buyer unit. There are definitely things that we skipped because we literally had 50% less time than we normally have in Ignite. Ignite is usually 3 days a week, 3 hours at a time. So we had 50% less time. And that's correct. We did not have an opportunity to tell you the cat story. And so what I will encourage you to do is this. When Ignite reruns, and it will probably rerun the next time more after we're reopened than online again. We will not, with Pivot coming in May, we are going to leverage that Pivot opportunity and have those of you who choose dive into the Pivot program, which, by the way, new or experienced, I do encourage. I signed up today because I've not known this organization to produce something that was not worthwhile. And so, for a 4-week program, I think it's going to be pretty powerful. So we will be doing that through May. And then depending on where we end May, if we're reopened, we may start to run Ignite again in early to mid-June or over the summer, again, depending on how and what things look like in terms of opening and protocol and all that good stuff. So I do encourage you, especially if you're new or newer to the business, to dive back in. And are you showing him Wilson? Yes, I thought so.
Hey, Rick.
Kim's son was behind her and she was pointing out Wilson to him. Let me just finish. And so, where was I? Oh, so if you're new to the company or newer to the business, I encourage you to dive back in and take this again so that you get the full Monty, right? Because again, we literally had 50% of the time to get as much information to you as possible. So we did skip a whole lot of stuff. And I encourage you to dive back in so that we can cover some of the things that we did not. I do hope this was helpful. Kimberly, one last thing and then we're out.
Okay, so this came up with my buyers. We have an inspection scheduled for tomorrow. The inspection company told the buyers that they weren't allowed to come into the house during the inspection.
Is it pillar to post?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So what's this conversation with that? I mean, my buyers are like, they're coming from New York and they feel they're paying a lot of money for this inspection report and they're buying the house. What if the inspector misses something that they would not have missed?
Yeah, so here's the only answer that I can give to that. So the guidance from CTR around the governor's executive order does not prohibit buyers in the house with an inspection. That has not come. It prohibits agents in the house with an appraiser, and it prohibits extraneous people in the house with an agent and their buyers. And yet there is no specific prohibition on inspectors having the buyers and their agent there. pillar to post, which is why I asked if it was pillar to post, because I know that pillar to post has taken a position that they want their inspector there only.
Right.
What I would say is make some calls tonight and see if you can't maybe get a different company.
Tiger.
They're
Right.
booked. Tiger's booked until Wednesday of next week, statewide.
Yeah, yeah, and so you know, unfortunately, that's their position. It is not a position that is supported by the state. So if they're telling you that the state prohibits that, that's not really true unless they've received something that I haven't seen.
Okay, cool.
I do know most other inspection companies are working with the buyers. Have any of you had buyers have inspections where buyers were in the house recently? Right, so I know that that's happening. It is a pillar to post issue more than not, and so they can either try and pivot or just follow pillar to post's policy on that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Guys, it's been my pleasure to spend time with you. I hope this was helpful. Call if you have any questions. Have a great evening and a great rest of the week if I don't see you, but I'm certain that I will see most of you tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.